There's a job to be done. There's a very special job. It'll mean you being taken from here and set free. By tomorrow, you'll be in Copenhagen.
What for?
To kill someone.
To kill someone?
Yeah. Does that shock you so? You were a soldier, Mr. Laker, huh?
Yes.
Well, killing was your duty then. A daily duty.
I wasn't in the SS.
And neither was I, Mr. Laker. I did not have the good fortune. I was too young. You're the one who was killed before.
You've got the wrong man.
You might recognize that voice as Old Blue Eyes himself. That's Frank Sinatra from a rather lost film and an admitted guilty pleasure. It's called The Naked Runner. Also a film that will further our discussion here on Take Two, the movie program on Public Radio KCBX, about that venerable screen character, the Hitman. And having that invigorating discussion with me, it's the man who has his film thing down. It's my very good friend across the aisle. It's Bob Whiteford.
And across the aisle from me, the undisputed czar of film on the Central Coast, a man I am proud to call friend, and I know you are too, beaming directly into your home. Of course, I'm talking about King Vidor Award-winning, all-around great guy, Jim Dee. And Jimmy, this is fun. Here we go. We're at it again, and we're kicking it off with Sinatra and Darren Nesbitt from the 1967 very obscure spy assassination film called The Naked Runner. And like you, Jimmy, this is a guilty pleasure of mine as well.
Well, just having seen it recently, I'm right with you there, Bob. But we should tell our listeners that this is part two of our look at that very interesting character in so many films and coming in so many sizes, shapes, and colors, the Hitman, something that really propels a film forward if there's a great story built around it. And we've been trying to take a look at some of the great screen hitmen and women, and we'll get more into the women later on. But segueing into this film called The Naked Runner, our film ending up last week was The Manchurian Candidate, also with Frank Sinatra, and in this case, Lawrence Harvey, the unwitting and he didn't know he was being turned into assassin in Manchurian Candidate. Interestingly, in The Naked Runner, it is Frank Sinatra who, not through brainwashing or anything, but is essentially tricked or coerced into becoming a hitman. But despite Frank's great performance and so many convolutions in this film, The Naked Runner, well, I just got the biggest kick out of it, but frankly, it's kind of a mess.
Yes, I think it's safe to say this is, you're left scratching your head at the conclusion of this film. The way it wraps up is rather absurd, actually, because the film is so convoluted. There's a really overly complicated triple cross at work, and it involves British intelligence in the form of Peter Vaughan, Edward Fox, and Darren Nesbitt, who's got a German accent. And what's interesting about this film, Jimmy, is it has an excellent look to it. We were talking about that. The visual quality of this film, Otto Heller was the cinematographer on this film, and it has that great European spy film look, which was very big in the 60s, and we're talking about maybe the spy films, the non-Bond spy films. Films like Spy That Came In From the Cold, Looking Glass War, Dandy and Aspic, just Quiller Memorandum, etc., The Chairman. There was a whole plethora of spy movies outside the Bond, bigger-than-life type, and this was one of them, and it got lost in the mix. And What's interesting about this film as well is this is the second time Sinatra played an assassin. He also played an assassin for hire in the 1954 film noir called Suddenly, with Sterling Hayden, Nancy Gates, James Gleason, etc., etc., etc. And oddly enough, that was a film that, along with The Manchurian Candidate, that Frank had buried for many years after the assassination of his good friend John F. Kennedy. This film touches upon the duplicity he's blackmailed, how intelligence services will use someone to commit murder in the name of the state. It's an interesting film, not a great film, but it is a guilty pleasure worth checking out if this is your forte.
Well, as almost a 1-2 punch, The Naked Runner, that's the name of the film we're talking about. Play it, get the double bill, get The Manchurian Candidate, and as Bob said, cinematic quality. They're not a match at all, but they're kind of fun to watch just because of Frank Sinatra's performance in both are quite good. And again, The Naked Runner, so convoluted, you're sort of lost, but I was just willing to go with it. It's a lot of fun if you can find it. We really wanted to include it on the show as one of those lost films, but Frank in it, he makes it worthwhile. The Naked Runner. Okay, we continue our discussion about hitmen, and we're not gonna really take a long shot here. We're gonna point out a certain screen character who has been in many, many films, and we think of this character as maybe a fighter of freedom or keeping the free world, clear of any bad guys. But when it comes down to it, this guy is a hitman, and not only that, but they'll take this hitman and arm him to the teeth.
You'll be using this Aston Martin DB5 with modifications. Now, pay attention, please. Windscreen bulletproof, as are the side and the rear windows. Revolving number plates, naturally. Valid all countries. Here's a nice little transmitting device called a Homer. You prime it by pressing that back like this. You see? The smaller model is now standard field issue, to be fitted into the heel of your shoe. Its larger brother is magnetic. Right. To be concealed in the car you're trailing while you keep out of sight. Reception on the dashboard here. Audio visual range 150 miles.
Ingenious and useful too. Allow a man to stop off for a quick one en route.
It has not been perfected out of years of patient research entirely for that purpose, 007. And incidentally, we'd appreciate its return, along with all your other equipment. Intact for once when you return from the field.
Oh, you'd be surprised the amount of wear and tear that goes on out there in the field. Anything else?
Well, I won't keep you for more than an hour or so if you give me your undivided attention. We've installed some rather interesting modifications. You see this arm here? Now open the top and inside are your defense mechanism controls. Smoke screen, oil slick, rear bulletproof screen, and left and right front wing machine guns. Now this one I'm particularly keen about. You see the gear lever here? Now if you take the top off, you'll find a little red button. Whatever you do, don't touch it.
Now, why not?
Because you'll release this section of the roof and engage and fire the passenger ejector seat. Whoosh.
Ejector seat? You're joking.
I never joke about my work, 007.
The voices of Sean Connery as James Bond, that is Desmond Llewellyn as the infamous Q, and that's from 1963's Goldfinger. Now, folks, we're going out on a limb here because we often think of James Bond as a protector of freedom or, out there for queen and country and making sure that the bad guys don't take over the world. But let's get down to it. This is a hitman extraordinaire. He has a license to kill, and he's sanctioned by the government. And, in the early Bond films, Bob and I were talking about how Sean Connery almost a rather sadistic killer. Yeah.
I'm thinking, listening to the clip, I was thinking back to Dr. No and From Russia with Love, the first two Bond films, where, especially Dr. No, where he has bad guys cornered, they've taken a crack at him and failed, and he takes kind of oddly, perverse pleasure in dispatching them.
Yes.
I know that from Dr. No was that the one fellow who tried to kill him with a tarantula, and then, then the Asian good-looking concubine, and that didn't work, and then he just tried killing him with a machine gun, failed. He stumbles into the room. Bond, played by Connery, is sitting cross-legged, very relaxed in his wicker chair, going, "You've had your six," and proceeds to empty his gun into him without batting an eye, without any remorse. There's nothing. He's just cold calculating. He has, quote-unquote, a license to kill. And basically, that's what he is. He's there to kill enemies of the state and dispatch them with no remorse, and as ruthlessly and as thoroughly as possible. Especially the way Connery played him in the early films. What makes this clip interesting, Jim, is this is where the cold-blooded killer of the first two films, this is the third film in the series, is mated with his gizmos and all the elaborate weapons that that would become basically the trademark of the series. And it's always wonderful to see, or in this case hear, the wonderful Desmond Llewellyn as Q, kitting out Bond in the latest gear.
Well, again, getting him all outfitted with all this weaponry, and of course he does have a license to kill. I mean, he is a killing machine. And as you said, Bob, the perverse delight that Connery showed in early films. I mean, in Goldfinger, there's a guy who gets electrocuted in a bathtub in the opening sequence, and of course his little remark is shocking, positively shocking. I mean, we think of maybe Clint Eastwood as the Dirty Harry character with the one-liners and the quips, but we got to go back to these early Bond films, and that killer in this spy. We think of him as a spy, but really when it boils down to it, he is the hitman extraordinaire. He's got the license, and he doesn't have to worry about any repercussions whatsoever, either from the state or perhaps from his own conscience.
Well, what's interesting, Jimmy? I'm glad you brought up Eastwood as Dirty Harry. I mean, Clint Eastwood's motivation in those films was he was fed up with the system. The system was constantly letting criminals go, and as a policeman he's forced to deal with them again, so he has to dispatch them because there's nothing else you can do. The courts have failed, the system's failed. The Bond films, Connery, Roger Moore, James Bond he's a weapon of the establishment, of the state. He's like a bomb almost, or a jet fighter or whatnot. Of course, he's far more of a compelling weapon because he's interesting, he's well-dressed, he's urbane, he's suave, we dig him. And but he kills for the state. And let's face it, he always succeeds.
He always succeeds, Bob, and I remember when we did our program on spies, and we have to resurrect those shows somewhere, but I as a counterbalance to, for instance, the killer that Bond is in Goldfinger, I remember the clip that we had from The Spy Who Came In From the Cold with Richard Burton, and essentially talking about spies being some of the lowest creatures on the planet. And when you think about the word spy, you're you're keeping track of somebody else, in the shadows. And in the case of James Bond, you've got the license to kill, so you can go even further. So it was a very interesting counterbalance with that speech of Richard Burton's in The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, really kind of telling it like it is, of what a spy's life is really about.
Yeah, I think the term he used was seedy, squalid bastards like me, meaning himself. And that's That's brilliant. But I think that's a great point to bring up. There's the difference between the spy and the professional killer.
A very thin line.
Very thin.
Very thin. Well, we want to move on. A number of other films we want to talk about, and we're going to get into, of course, we're going to mention Martin Scorsese here in a moment, but one of the failings of this show, I'll go so far to use that word, is of the many subjects we tackle here on Take Two, we give short shrift to foreign language films, just simply because we like to play clips, and it would be nice if everyone, including us, could speak all foreign languages, but that would be a little tough to do. But as we're talking about films with hitmen, we do want to talk about at least a handful of really fantastic films that fit into this category. And one of them is a very early, well, not early, but early in, shall we say, mafia type movies called Mafioso from Italy. Now, Bob, did this get the Criterion treatment or not?
Yes, it did.
Okay. You and I both saw this film when it was re-released by Rialto Pictures, I want to say, 3 or 4 years ago or so. And Mafioso, remember that name because if you enjoy the Godfather films, if you enjoy Scorsese's gangster films or any gangster films, you got to go back and check this one out because it's sort of a forerunner of all of those. And the fact that, hey, you've got you got family members down there in Sicily, and you're up in northern Italy, and you're going to go visit the family, But it just so happens that your family has mafia ties, and guess what? On this vacation, you're singled out to do the bidding of the family, which, of course, is becoming a hitman.
This film is so wonderful. It stars the wonderful Alberto Sordi. And he was kind of a big star in Italy and definitely in Europe, a bit of a cult star. America probably didn't know him too well, which is unfortunate. This film, it's shot kind of in that Italian neo-realist, kind of a blend of the neo-realist style and the avant-garde in some aspects. I mean, it's in black and white, and I'd swear that it's all shot on location. I don't think there's any studio shots in this film. It starts off just as like this kind of light, frothy, weird Italian comedy, and then it takes this very peculiar left turn when the Padrone calls in a favor. I think while they're discussing one of Alberto Sordi's female cousins and her problem of having a mustache or something, and you're ha, 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 and then there's the Padrone, oh, come here and talk to me. And then the film takes on a very bizarre and, quite frankly, it's a rather jarring turn, because then the Padrone, who he's talked about all through the film in such a loving way, who is the mobster, who's the guy who also helped him out and helped his family out, decides, since he's back on vacation and he's successful and he's got a beautiful wife that all the Sicilian guys are going nuts over, and he's very successful, beautiful little girl. The Padrone decides this is where he calls in the chip. I need a little favor done. Next thing you know, he's crated up and shipped to New York on some aircraft, and he's got to kill somebody.
Yeah. And it examines sort of that idea of family duty. Of course, we're visiting Godfather type things to the point where this is family business. So, I mean, how can you really duck out on this? It's your family duty to do this.
It's all about his sense of honor. Because, Jim, the thing that makes this film funny, compelling, and a little bit terrifying all at the same time, which is the mark of a great film, that it can touch on so many different elements. He's just an average man. He's like you or me or people out there that are listening to the show. He's just plucked up from his normal, mundane life, and he's thrust into this situation, and his sense of duty and debt to his padrone is so strong, which is very old, very ancient in the Sicilian culture, that he has to do it. And he does it, and it transforms him. It makes him, he's still got the smile and all that, but he's changed.
Yes.
And this film is wonderful to see, highly recommended if you get the chance. It's called Mafioso. You'll be glad you did it. You'll be thanking Jim and I when you do see this.
We both recommend Mafioso, and here's another foreign language film, a must-see in this category. It's the great Jean-Pierre Melville's Le Samurai with Alain Delon. This is perhaps one of the best hitman films. It's, I was watching some of this today, Bob, and it's what I want to call it pure cinema. There's very little dialogue, but this thing... When I say this film moves forward. It's got this narrative drive. There's a master filmmaker at work here, and it's almost, very little dialogue, but it's the very lonely, very solitary life of Alain Delon as the hitman, or the one to do the job. And it is fascinating to watch, and I think that of all the films we've mentioned on our two programs here about hitmen on the silver screen, this is one you really should seek out. Again, a film that got the Criterion treatment, and just go with this film and get the existential undercurrent of this guy's life. It's really something to see. Le Samurai, both Bob and I highly recommend it.
Absolutely. It's fair to say that Jean-Pierre Melville, the great French filmmaker of the 50s and 60s and early 70s, is getting a second look now. He's one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. This quite possibly could be the best film he ever did. And Alain Delon can do so much by saying so little. This film is really effective. Even if you don't dig foreign films, you must give Le Samurai a shot, because this is not only a great film, it's great cinema. And this is, I agree with Jim, this is probably one of the best films about the topic we're talking about. Unfortunately, we can't play a clip because it's all in French.
And very little French, as you might add.
Very little. Yeah, there's hardly any dialogue to the film.
Yes. So first of all, our first two foreign language recommendations, Mafioso and Le Samurai. And two more. It's not the greatest film, more of an action film, but Luc Besson's La Femme Nikita, another sort of twist on the hit, shall we call it, hit woman in this case, which is kind of a fun film to watch. It was also remade in this country called Point of No Return. And finally, another film I would highly recommend. It came from Belgium. It's called Memory of a Killer. It came out, I want to say, about 5 years ago. This is a great film, an older hitman who not only has that code of honor where he will not fulfill the job of taking out a teenage girl, but he's also got Alzheimer's. It sounds funny. It's fabulous. It's called Memory of a Killer. So 4 foreign language recommendations from Take Two. We would really like you to see Mafioso, Le Samurai, La Femme Nikita, and Memory of a Killer, if you're into the hitman thing.
And those are top shelf.
Okay, let's move on here. Again, we're talking about the early 60s here, and Bob, I was watching some of this film today, and what a great discovery. This is from what, about 1961, 62?
Yeah, maybe 60, 61.
It's a film called Murder Incorporated with a very young Peter Falk. And folks, he's not Columbo in this. He's kind of your Joe Pesci sort of type of guy in this film. And we do have a clip, but set up this film. It's really something.
Well, this film it's pretty interesting because it's I wouldn't call it a film noir. It's just a straight-ahead crime film. Murder Incorporated was what the mob was called back in the 20s and 30s. It was all about, if you're killing somebody, you're doing it for a reason. The reason was they're getting in the way of the cash flow, business. Peter Falk, this is one of his earliest films. I think like 1959, he was in Pocket Full of Miracles. He was a part of Sinatra's Rat Pack at this time. So this was an early effort from him. It also features the wonderful Stuart Whitman, Sammy Davis Jr.'s wife at that time, Mae Britt, and basically it's about Peter Falk, who's kind of I like the analogy to Joe Pesci in Goodfellas. He's a mob button man, a killer, a contract killer, and he's a little wild. He's very good at what he does. The problem is that he burns a little too hot. And while it makes him effective at his job, it also gets him in trouble, not unlike Joe Pesci in Goodfellas. In fact, I think the two characters, cinematically speaking, have a certain connection, which, a certain pedigree there. And it's kind of the wild cowboy mob killer who's, burns a little too hot, but, is a professional killer. That's what he does. He doesn't do anything else. He kills people. And there's a pretty interesting clip here of him after he has clipped someone.
Here's a clip from Murder Incorporated. This is Stuart Whitman and Peter Falk.
Hey, Joey. Listen, you want to get a laugh? Guess who popped up? Your friend, that comic, Walter Sage. Yeah, he popped right up out of the lake. What do you think of that? Despite the numerous punctures in the body and the heavy slot machine used as a weight, the body did not lose its buoyancy and rose to the surface. You see, with a bum like that, you gotta be a doctor, or else he floats.
You swore you only gonna rough him up.
Well, that's all we did, but you see, the man was in delicate health. He couldn't take it.
He couldn't take a nice pick in the gut, huh?
Shut up.
Why? Why did you kill him?
He had bad breath. Now you listen to me. This is it. From this you take no walks. Stay in line, keep your mouth shut. He get killed. And the wife too. Huh?
You recognize that Peter Falk voice very young in this, but Bob, I love this clip. I mean, I guess I have to say, it's from Murder Incorporated, and the unintentional funniness of the fact that instead of giving the guy a pair of cement shoes so he sinks to the bottom of the lake, they strap a slot machine to him. And it didn't quite work. So he comes up to the, floats to the top of the lake. I guess the slot machine didn't have enough weight to it. But I mean, so without batting an eye, these guys, man, we stabbed the heck out of him and tied a slot machine to him, but
he still managed to float up. And it's like he has to go share this with Stuart Whitman. Hey, I've got a funny story to tell you. This is a for its time, pretty tough film.
Yes.
And if you're a fan of mob films, and I know some of you are out there, this is one worth checking out. Directed, I think it's an early effort from Stuart Rosenberg, who did Cool Hand Luke and a couple of the couple other films that are not coming to mind right away. But he's a terrific filmmaker. Oh, he did Pope of Greenwich Village too. Oh. So it's an early effort from him, an American filmmaker that has done a bunch of films we've all seen and talked about, but you didn't know he made them.
Our film we're just talking about is Murder Incorporated, and we are talking about hitmen in the movies. You're listening to the movie program on Public Radio KCBX. It's Take Two. We'll have more on hitmen in a moment. You're listening to Take Two on Public Radio, KCBX and KCBX HD1, San Luis Obispo, KSBX Santa Barbara, and KNBX San Ardo. We're streaming worldwide at kcbx.org. You can write to the program at movies@kcbx.org. And check out the Take Two program archives at kcbx.org. And you can also catch us at npr.org.
Take Two is sponsored by the 2010 San Luis Obispo International Film Festival, running March 12th through the 21st. Complete information available at slowfilmfest.org.
Support for KCBX comes from the Cupay Winery Tasting Room, open daily in Los Olivos, featuring wines of Cupay, Verdad, and Ethan, sourced primarily from organic and biodynamic grapes. More at cupay.com. We're back on Take Two, the movie program, here on Public Radio KCBX. My name is Jim Dee. I'm here with my good friend Bob Whiteford, and the subject is hitmen in the movies. This is part 2 of our discussion. We hope you can check out our previous show from last week. You can go to kcbx.org, look for our Hitman show, part 1. Our shows are also available at npr.com, .org, npr.org. Well, Bob, we move on now to an obvious choice. We're going to just play you the trailer from this quintessential movie when you're talking about hitmen.
Never rat on your friends, and always keep your mouth shut.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
Hey, Mom, what do you think?
You look like a gangster.
I know I'd
By the time I grew up, there was $30 billion a year in cargo moving through Idlewild Airport. And believe me, we tried to steal every bit of it.
What do you do? I'm in construction.
He's not Jewish.
Mazel tov.
For most of the guys, killing's got to be accepted.
Hey, Henry, here's an arm.
Very funny, guys.
Here's a leg. Here's a wing. What do you like, the leg or the wing?
For us, to live any other way was nuts. And we were treated like movie stars with muscle. We had it all just for the asking.
It's gonna be a good summer.
It was a glorious time.
That is the trailer for the great film Martin Scorsese brought to us in the late 80s, Goodfellas. And you know, Bob, I remember when I first saw Goodfellas, it was pretty shocking at the time. I think we've become jaded over the years. Of course, the Godfather films were pretty tough in the violence and the goings-on of the mafia families and so on. But Goodfellas, I just remember, just took it a step further, and again, to fit this into our discussion about hitmen of the movies, I mean, again, the brutality of it, have been the lack of moral, any sort of moral center of these guys. However, you know, it's part of business. It's part of the family stuff. It's again, we're not playing any clips from The Godfather. I think everything that could be said about the Godfather series perhaps has been said, or we can devote another show to that. But I do remember seeing Goodfellas, and boy, I had to sort of, gather myself up, because it did take the gangster film and also the idea of the hitman truly a step further.
Well, you know what kind of separates this film? I mean, I think, Jimmy, this is arguably the best film Scorsese did. And it's one of the best films I've ever seen. What makes it different from The Godfather in a big part is these guys are not cloistered away behind some big iron gate or a compound. They're living in the house next door to you or me. They live next door to the mailman or the guy who, works at the airport or whatever. They're among us. And this is what they do to pay their mortgage or to get their kids braces or whatever. And this is what makes this film so much more fascinating. I mean, aside from the fact that you've got De Niro, Joe Pesci, Ray Liotta, Paul Sorvino, etc., 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 at the absolute top of their game, but that it brings it to the neighborhoods we live in. No exotic locales like James Bond. It's right here, right next door. This guy. And his kids are going to school with you. And this is what he does for a living. Compared to your dad, which is going on a train, going into the city to go to work, and he comes, does the 8 to 5 thing. This guy, this is what he does. Goodfellas, wonderful film, and you get inside these guys. You're inside their world, and you're right. There's a moral vacuum here. It's just you go from one thing to another to another. It's sort of like in some cases they're addicted to the adrenaline of it all. In other cases, it's old school, like mafioso. You have traditional ties. In other cases, it's very similar. I like that it's back-to-back with Murder Incorporated because it's a very similar film in terms of what it's touching upon. And the killers, like Joe Pesci in Goodfellas and Peter Falk in Murder Incorporated, you're horrified at what they do, yet you find yourself laughing along with them and liking them, which as a viewer, you have to take a moment and kind of step back and look at yourself and go, what is this? It's like I'm identifying with this character, which I think in part is a tribute to how well made the films are, how great the performances are. Joe Pesci won an Academy Award for this film, and sadly, I think it kind of typecast him, but I mean, Tommy DeVito is fantastic. I mean, what a great character, and he plays it to the hilt amongst great characters.
Well, what's interesting too, Bob, is a lot of the films that we've been talking about on this program. I mean, going back to The Killers back in 1946, were that very intimidating. Hitmen are, terrorizing these people in this diner, and of course, with some of the famous scenes in Goodfellas, are when Joe Pesci is asking, you think I'm funny, sort of thing, and just getting you thoroughly uncomfortable over almost nothing because you don't know what these guys are going to do next. I mean, the fact that Joe Pesci kind of unwittingly kills the kid who's in The Sopranos, just because he kind of loses his head and get out of here, kid, and ends up shooting him. I mean, it's the mixture of the very dark comedy with the very truly dark things that happen in this picture, I think usher in a new era. I mean, we talk about The Sopranos too. Here's the newest twist on the mafia, where the mafia boss is getting therapy. We've got the Robert De Niro, Billy Crystal films, Analyze This, Analyze That, which take it a little bit further. Another film called Grosse Point Blank has, the hitmen going to their high school reunions. So the idea of the hitman being this still enigmatic, mysterious, dark character, perhaps amoral character, and putting them into these, like you said, neighborhood situations, pretty much started with Goodfellas, but you can also see it in other films where they were, wringing it out for comedic purposes, but also keeping that undercurrent of, fear and horror that this guy could put a gun to your head as quickly as he could be drinking the punch at the high school reunion.
Well, Jimmy, I think it's fair to state, too, that I think Goodfellas really opened the door for Tarantino with Reservoir Dogs and his film about contract killers, Pulp Fiction, because Goodfellas had kind of changed the rules on violence and characterizations of people, where you're finding yourself oddly compelled and liking people that are committing heinous crimes, and you don't have to guess about the heinous crimes they're committing, because as a as a viewer, you're literally dropped right in the middle, and you get to see them commit their crimes in glorious Technicolor.
Yes.
And I think, in a way, yes, Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction definitely, and Abel Ferrara's Bad Lieutenant walk through that door that Scorsese opened. They're different types of films, but that's what makes Goodfellas so, cinematically anyway, a really important film, because it kind of changed the rules in an interesting way.
Yes. Well, here's another film. Of all the films that we were mentioning, and of course we put Goodfellas up there, but mixing in the hitman, in this case also a hit woman, with, comedic elements, we have to go to John Huston's Prizzi's Honor, which, incidentally, again, I'm not sure where I read this, Bob, but Jack Nicholson reading the script to Prizzi's Honor, he wasn't sure how to play it, goes to John Huston, and Huston has to tell him, hey, Jack, this is a comedy, But it is a brilliant comedy, and the wonderful Kathleen Turner, watching some of this again over the years, boy, Kathleen Turner, what an amazing actress. She was absolutely gorgeous, and as a hit woman in Prizzi's Honor, she's got what it takes. And Jack Nicholson as Charlie Partana, and Bob, I forget the name of the wonderful actor who was
William Hickey.
Oh,
wasn't he great in that?
Okay, I would have to put forth the idea that The Godfather and Brando, of course, everyone was talking about him mumbling and what's in his mouth, but again, he becomes the quintessential, he becomes the archetype of The Godfather. But if Prizzi's Honor came out before The Godfather, I will say that William Hickey's portrayal of The Godfather is not only dead on perfect, but absolutely hilarious. And he's got this voice talking about Charlie Partana. And it's brilliant. Every time I see it, I think he is just such an amazing actor, but it's sort of like over the top, but also perfect. So let's listen to a little bit of Prizzi's Honor. Here's Jack Nicholson and Kathleen Turner. Pretty self-explanatory that these are two people whose job it is to whack people.
I've been all shook up.
Why?
Know everything. I know you made the hit on Netta Bino after the wedding reception when we met. I know you've been scamming us with Louie and your husband.
I did the work on Netta Bino. I had nothing to do with what Moxie and his partner did.
Paolo was so suspicious that he checked the car for bombs every time he started it. But he would have let some beautiful broad walk over, get in, or sit on his face.
No matter how you got it in your head, Charlie, you're wrong. I had nothing to do with it. Nothing. Charlie, did you mean it that first night when you asked if I'd marry you? Charlie.
All right. The Preachies are gonna have to believe me because I believe you. So, when can we get married? What do you say we have another one of those pineapple drinks or something? The honeymoon is already started.
Kiss me, Charlie.
Jack Nicholson, Hitman. Kathleen Turner, hit woman, and they go from being suspicious of each other, of I know you did that job over here, and then of course they go on to the proposal and marrying each other. And the script of this film, Prizzi's Honor, is really wonderful, and the way they play with this idea is brilliant. And I just that conversation there, it's like, well, I know you've been doing this work, but will you marry me?
Well, it's almost like they're two people sitting down that are attracted to each other and they work for other firms. It's like they don't, it's just shop talk to them. And the big thing coming through in the conversation is that they really dig each other. So they're going to just put it all together. And They have great chemistry in this film. It's worth noting. And boy, Kathleen Turner in the 80s was really doing some great stuff. I mean, I'm thinking about Body Heat. That's not quite a contract killer, but she might as well have been one. She was that good. By being bad, good, bad,
Yeah.
you know, naughty but nice.
Well, and Prizzi's Honor also has a number of other great actors. I'm thinking of Angelica Houston is in this film, and you also just have to step back a little bit and realize here Jack Nicholson, Angelica Houston with their long-term relationship, and John Huston in the director's chair, and somehow I think the direction of this film. I mean, Jack Nicholson's performance just a little bit, getting into character, or shall we say, a little bit of satire of the hitman with that lip that he has, but the entire ensemble in this film is really fantastic, and there are just pitting these ideas together and making a wonderfully funny, but also darkly funny film of, like you say, competing families and mixing business with pleasure, shall we say, with these two, going on with their jobs but falling in love with each other.
I would say if you like dark comedy, black comedy, kind of off-kilter comedy, this might be the film for you.
John Huston's Prizzi's Honor, we highly recommend it. If you haven't seen it in a while, go check it out. Well, now Bob and I are going to go off on a couple of tangents here. We were thinking about other types of hitmen, and we both agreed that the next film, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, even though we don't have the traditional gangster setting, but we're talking about Martin Sheen in the great 1979 film Apocalypse Now. And yes, this is a Vietnam film. It's very surreal in parts and very straight ahead, war adventure. But when it gets right down to it, we do realize that Martin Sheen's job in this film is to, shall we say, take away the command of Kurtz, who has gone mad, portrayed by Marlon Brando. He is the hitman in this film.
Well, we're kind of going back to what we were talking about before, about state-sanctioned hits, or when, you're making a hit for the government or whatnot. And here it is, it's a war. So killing is a part of a war, as ugly as that is. You're killing the enemy, right? But in this case, very odd, you have to kill one of your own people who's gone basically off the reservation. And, I mean, this film really, this touches on moral cores. This touches on senses of right and wrong, even though Sheen is a professional killer. And it's clear that he is. He's a pro. He's done this before. But in the course of this film, on his way to find Brando and dispatch him as per his orders, which of course don't exist, he also, in the process of trying to learn about the person he's been assigned to kill, he's finding something about himself, is that he understands and respects the man he's got to kill far more than the people who have sent him to do the killing. He's kind of following the path that Brando's character has, but in the process of getting to where he is, he sees the folly in what they're doing. Of course, he's going to do the job because he's a professional, but it's changed him. It's opened his eyes to something. I mean, that's just one part of this film. This film is so deep, and it's so... I mean, this is great cinema. This is one of the greatest films of all time as well. And Brando kind of has that aspect to him, too. The only way to win a war like that is to be ruthless, to be a killer, because he learned that from the Vietnamese, how they would, they're just regular people. I mean, he talks about that scene where they came in and chopped off all the inoculated arms and piled them up neatly. And he said these aren't psychotics or psychopaths or monsters. They're just men. And they did this because this is what you have to do to win. And he kind of got off. He kind of snapped at that point and saw that this was the only way we could win, is to be as brutal as they are. And of course, in the convoluted morass that was Vietnam, where the country's, our nation's morality kind of went off the deep end, trying to figure out how to handle the situation we had blundered into. I mean, there's bigger questions that come up as well. And I think this, in terms of the Hitman, Martin Sheen's portrayal as Captain Willard is one of the best, because there's an element of reality to this, hands-on reality. You can't do this stuff and not be affected. You just can't, unless, it's Friday the 13th, part 54. Jason doesn't care. Yeah. But even the professional, his core erodes over this.
Yeah, Bob, it's really interesting. We started off the program with Frank Sinatra and the Naked Runner. He's chosen to be a hitman because of his military history. Here we have Apocalypse Now, where, we talked about certain hitmen have codes of honor, and we think about war. There's Geneva Conventions and things, but we really realize those codes are not really standing. I mean, they're kind of out there, but there's no rules. And as we learn in the war films or some of these films with hitmen, it's sort of like there are codes in place. Unfortunately, the code doesn't exclude, killing you, but there are some codes that they seem to go by. So let's listen to this clip. Here is Martin Sheen and Marlon Brando from the infamous Apocalypse Now.
What did they tell you? They told me that you had gone totally insane. And that your methods were unsound. Are my methods unsound? I don't see any method at all. I expected someone like you. What did you expect? Are you an assassin?
I'm a soldier.
You're neither. You're an errand boy, sent by grocery clerks to collect a bill.
From Apocalypse Now, Marlon Brando and Martin Sheen. And when you get down to it, Bob, all of these hitmen are errand boys, aren't they?
Just out there to collect a bill.
That's from Apocalypse Now. Now, we have time for our final clip, and it's probably from one of the most chilling films that you wouldn't expect to be on a show about hitmen. It is Woody Allen's Crimes and Misdemeanors, featuring not only Woody Allen, but an incredible performance by the great Martin Landau. We want to play this clip. It's we can tell you the plot of the film. There's a couple of things going on, but basically Martin Landau's lover is Angelica Houston. He's a very wealthy and prestigious person in society, and he's also married with kids, and his affair turns into a big problem for him, and he does have Angelica Houston killed. Now, we get into we're talking about that moral abyss or amoral abyss, but what is so fascinating about this film, Crimes and Misdemeanors, is it touches upon perhaps those who perpetrate or want to have a person killed and employ someone to do it. They almost become the amoral hit person. It's really fascinating. Listen to this clip. Now, there's a kind of a glitch in the middle of this. This is Martin Landau sort of confessing his sins to Woody Allen about what he had done. There's a little, you'll get the clip, but you'll find out what happens to Martin Landau after he has already ordered the hit on Angelica Houston. This is from Crimes and Misdemeanors.
You look very deep in thought.
I was plotting the perfect murder.
Yeah? Movie plot?
Movie?
Well, Ben, that's what Ben told me. He says you make films.
Yeah, but not that kind. You know, a different kind.
I have a great murder story.
Yes?
Great plot. Yeah. Hey, I've had too many to drink. I mean, forgive me. I know you want your privacy.
No, it's okay. I'm not doing anything special.
Except my murder story has a very strange twist.
Yeah.
Let's say there's this man who's very successful. He has everything. And after the awful deed is done, he finds that he's plagued by deep-rooted guilt. Little sparks of his religious background, which he'd rejected, are suddenly stirred up. He hears his father's voice. He imagines that God is watching his every move. And suddenly it's not an empty universe at all, but a just and moral one, and he's violated it. Now he's panic-stricken. He's on the verge of a mental collapse. An inch away from confessing the whole thing to the police. And then, one morning, he awakens, and the sun is shining, and his family is around him. Mysteriously, the crisis is lifted. He takes his family on a vacation to Europe, and as the months pass, he finds he's not punished. In fact, he prospers. The killing gets attributed to another person, a drifter who has a number of other murders to his credit, so, I mean, what the hell, one more doesn't even matter. Now he's scot-free. His life is completely back to normal. Back to his protected world of wealth and privilege.
Yes, but can he ever really go back?
Well, people carry sins around with them. I mean, oh, maybe once in a while he has a bad moment, but it passes. And with time, it all fades.
Yeah, but so then, you know, then his worst beliefs are realized.
Well, I said it was a chilling story, didn't I?
I don't know. I think it'd be tough for somebody to live with that. You know, it's very few guys could actually live, you know, to live with something like that on their conscience.
What do you mean? People carry awful deeds around with them. And what do you expect them to do? Turn himself in? I mean, this is reality. In reality, we rationalize, we deny, or we couldn't go on living.
Here's what I would do. I would have him turn himself in, because then you see, then your story assumes tragic proportions, because in the absence of a god or something, he is forced to assume that responsibility himself. Then you have tragedy.
But that's fiction. That's movies. I mean, you see too many movies. I mean, I'm talking about reality. I mean, if you want a happy ending, you should go see a Hollywood movie.
The great Martin Landau and Woody Allen in Crimes and Misdemeanors, we think an interesting way to wrap up our overview of hitmen in the silver screen. We hope you've enjoyed our look at that subject here on Take Two, the movie program, and we will be back again next week. Bob?
Take care, everybody. It's been a blast. We'll see you next week.